So some of you may remember me raving about the Niño de Elche album that came out last year. It was a mammoth of a release. It was like an hour and 46 minutes in length, a double album that I totally understand people having reservations with diving into an album that long. But I promise you, it's so good. It is so good. Even if you don't like the whole thing, which I'm sure you would at least enjoy a good chunk of it. Like, you would pick out at least a few songs from that entire release that you would love. And as time's gone on, it's only gotten better for me, honestly. It's actually crawled into my top 10 for last year now. I genuinely think it's an album that's gonna be looked at in a very interesting way in the future once it garners a bit more of that major cult status. It at least deserves that anyway. And somehow Niño de Elche is already onto some more music. Like, it's crazy to me how he's dropped such a huge album last year and we have another release this year. It's impressive. Even more impressive knowing that this album's quality is pretty damn high. It was never going to be on the level as the 2018 release, but I feel as though Colombiana is a highlight for Niño de Elche and 2019 in its own right. It's a pretty short 10-track, 37-minute release. You couldn't even argue that there's any filler on this one this time around because it just breezes by so quickly. There might be one or two moments here and there that aren't quite as enjoyable, unfortunately, I think, on this album, but generally the whole thing is pretty awesome. Niño brings on quite a few guest vocalists on this album, all female vocalists that bring in like a nice little flair and a nice touch to this Flamenco Nuevo style. Once again, he's blending ideas together, not just being in the Flamenco Nuevo sound. There's a bit of freak folk in here, there's some experimental moments as well. Quite a few tracks, especially towards the beginning, follow a pretty standard flow for Flamenco Nuevo, and then they'll transition into something completely different and it kind of takes you off guard, and it's just exciting to follow the track's progression, you know? You think you know where they're going, but Niño just ends up surprising you by throwing in some weird vocals and over-the-top performances that are just so fun to listen to. The friggin' drum machine that he uses on the third track is ridiculous. Like, the way it's just so off kilter, and yet his weird isms just end up working so well over this beat. Then once the second half of the song comes in, it's this insanely danceable, groovy section that is just so catchy and ridiculous. This exact same thing happens on the second track as well. There are so many moments across this album that are just taken straight out of like the MPB playbook or some like Latino type dance music that Niño just rides so well, and it's just so fun to listen to. Track 6 is an interesting track because Niño on this one is just so low with his voice, and it's just so subtle as well, and it just pairs so well with the instrumental. I really love the way it works. Track following this as well is a ridiculously bombastic dance jam with, once again, just this. The track following this is just this ridiculously bombastic dance jam. Once again, just the creativity that's put behind these tracks to make them not only really catchy, but groovy, fun, and just completely off the wall as well. The drumming on this one is insanely rhythmic as well, and across this entire album, especially on the penultimate track on this album, I'd say. It's very tasteful and filled with so much character, and it just matches Niño's energy the whole way through. And while I'm on the topic of like nitpicks and gripes, I definitely think track 8, Ni Chicha Ni Limona, I'm probably saying all these things wrong. And while I'm on the negatives, I may as well bring up the fact that track 8, Ni Chicha Ni Limona, is pretty weak. Like, the experimentation that's attempted here doesn't follow through very well. The vocals get very, very grating on my ears, to be honest. And while he is very good generally at repetition, this is just one of those moments that feels like it's going on way too long, because the first track on the album is quite repetitive too, but I like the way it builds and the instrumentation comes together and builds around it. It's quite nice. On this one, the entire hook is built around him just riffing on this vocalization, this it just gets really annoying. I just feel as though this track definitely could have been sorted a bit. But aside from that being the clearly obvious worst track, I don't really think there's any moments on this album that I would take away. I think overall it's just pretty damn great. Once again, this is for me another like album that's perhaps not really getting that representation in the Western world, proving that actually, you know what, when you dig deeper and find these types of albums, you're gonna find some good stuff. And while you may have already like constructed your own beliefs in your mind about what you think Flamenco Nuevo would sound like, even if you haven't explored the genre, believe me when I say when you try out Niño de Elche's work, he's gonna pull out some surprises. Like, you're not gonna be getting exactly what you're expecting. So while I definitely think his last album was much more inventive and experimental and adventurous, this is probably the best starting point for him as an artist, because it's not as daunting going into this 37-minute release than it was trying out that almost 2-hour long double album. So there's no excuses with this one. You got to listen to it. I'm gonna go 8 out of 10. Definitely worth your time. Listen to this album. Thank you if you have listened to it. Let me know your thoughts. Have a good day. Bye. Wee.